Let's jump right into this. Engine Performance 1, Test 13. Engine Performance 1, Test 13. We'll probably have some laggers dragging in here in a minute. Add to what we've got in here now. Okay, we have got fuel delivery and injection. All of the following statements are correct except A, stuck fuel injectors might cause a drop in fuel pressure after the pump is shut off. B, a defective pressure regulator might cause a drop in fuel pressure after the pump is shut off. C, a defective check valve is the only reason the fuel pressure might drop after the pump is shut off. What do you think?
Oh.
Now, this is really a stupidly worded question with a stupid answer to it.
It's D.
No, it can't be D, because you've just talked about two other reasons besides a defective check valve in A and B, and it can't be D because that would be counterintuitive, because you were saying that, you know, C actually contradicts A and B. All right, so, huh? What does?
Yeah. Because see, if you put D, because there's other ones that are wrong, then it makes D right.
Yeah, because it says all of the following statements are correct except.
Well, what shoots that down is the word only.
Which is why I'm saying C.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, C is the answer they want, but I'm gonna tell you guys. I mean, you put C if you want to. And so, what's wrong with it? What's wrong with her, Willie? What you running into? Give him that test so he'll quit looking for one.
This is it right here. You got one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Fuel and engine performance 1, test 13. All right, you got that? He's rustling papers over there, worrying me to death. All right, but I'm gonna tell you, stuck fuel injectors can cause a drop in pressure after the fuel pump is shut off, if they're stuck open, or if you've got one that's leaking, right? Okay, a defective fuel pressure regulator can cause a drop in fuel pressure after the pump is shut off. Because if something's trapped underneath it, or that little internal seat's not seated good. So basically, A, B, and C, if they left the word only out, they can say a defective check valve is one reason. If you put one instead of only, fuel pressure might drop after the fuel pump shut off. Now, I will tell you the most common cause of fuel pressure drop after you shut a pump off is C. Let me hit you with this. So what happens if the fuel pressure drops after you shut off the pump? Why is that a problem?
It's what now?
If the fuel pressure, you're checking your fuel pressure, you got your fuel pressure gauge on there, you're seeing 40 pounds of PSI, 30 pounds, whatever, you shut it off, and that fuel pressure should stay really close to 30 pounds for a pretty good while. It shouldn't drop off. If it drops off, what happens then? On a really hot engine, it drops off, you wind up with a bunch of air bubbles in your fuel rail, because if it's not under pressure, what's it going to do? It's going to bubble and boil. And then you're trying to shoot air into the cylinders whenever you're, instead of fuel, you're going to have a hard start when it's hot. And so I'm going to have to take issue with this particular question, that whoever wrote it hadn't worked on a lot of cars, because I've seen all three of these.
I can draw a line through only then.
Yeah, draw a line through only, but C is actually the correct answer according to the answer key. Now, there was a guy that came in there on a Thunderbird one time that was like a 87 model. And he was telling me that, he said his thing, he said, when I first got this car, when you just breathe on the key and it'd fire up, boom. He says, now I got to spin it for about 30 minutes. I mean, not 30 minutes, 30 seconds before it starts. And whenever I took the injectors out of that one, after I looked at everything else that could cause it, and there was a little bit of a drop in fuel pressure when you shut off, but not a big drop in fuel pressure. It wasn't enough to cause this, it's because of the drop in pressure. I pulled the injectors out, 3 of them, the tips of them were washed clean. Now what does that mean?
I mean,
They're leaking. They're leaking. Those 3 injectors are leaking. The other ones were dirty. So I took the injectors out of another Thunderbird that was brand new and popped in there, and it took care of its problem. Then we got new injectors for that other Thunderbird. I mean, it was a Thunderbird we had on the lot, Okay, all of the following statements are correct except what? A, throttle body injection is designed for lower fuel pressure than port fuel injection. That is a broad statement that's not always true. Now, if you're talking GM, yes. If you're talking Ford, on a Ford, you got just as much fuel pressure on a throttle body injected Ford, like an 84, and back to 83 and all. They're going to have just as much fuel pressure as the ones that's got the, except they don't have the vacuum line going to the fuel pressure regulator. But they're supposed to have about 40 pounds. But throttle body, okay, fuel injectors have a built-in filter. That's true. The little screen in the top of the injector, you'll see that. C, inline fuel filters may be installed in either direction.
Nope.
That's not true. But I'll tell you that throttle body injection, unless you're just talking GM and you're throwing everybody else in the dump, that's not a true statement. A is not a true statement either. That's another question I got to take issue with. Fuel pump may be able to create good fuel pressure but inadequate volume, and it's a true statement. You know, inadequate volume would be from what? If it's having trouble, if it's got a fuel filter issue, you'll have enough pressure but you won't have enough volume, right? How can you tell if you got if you're driving a car, what is a red flag that's pointing at fuel pressure or fuel volume is an issue? See, a lot of people want to change a fuel filter because their car don't start like they think it ought to, and that's a bunch of hooey, huh?
Well, I had a problem with mine on my first truck, and as I was going one day, it started acting like it wouldn't go, like it would catch and then it would stop and then it would catch.
Exactly. So
And once I floored it and let go of it and the thing would go. I would let go of the gas and the thing would like accelerate.
Yeah. Yeah, so you actually were deep into it and it was trying to hunker down. That's fuel filter right there. When you're into it strong and it's losing power like you're passing something, you're trying to accelerate real fast, that's a fuel delivery problem that's related usually to the filter. If the car's not starting right, or if it's not idling like you want it to and all that, replacing a fuel filter is a joke. You're not going to, I mean, it ain't may not be a bad thing to do, but it ain't going to make it idle no better. It ain't going to make it start no better, unless the darn thing's completely clogged up with mud or something like that. And if that's the case, you got trouble in your tank. Technician A says fuel filters are located in the fuel supply line. Technician B says fuel filters are located in the fuel return line. Who's right about that? A only. Okay, can you change the fuel filter easily on every vehicle?
No.
Some of it's in a tank. Some of them it's supposed to last like 120,000 miles. Some of those Dodges had a big old fuel filter on the bottom. It almost looked like an old air filter under a breather, and it's on the tank. I mean, it's in the tank, and you're supposed to replace the pump and the filter every 120,000 on those. Nobody wants to do that, but I mean, the only way you can change it. They also got, I think that little Dodge. That we got that Plymouth Neon. I believe the fuel filter in the tank on that. I could be wrong about that. I better probably shut my mouth about that. But anyway, I knew that a lot of them Dodges, it's regulated in the tank and it's filtered in the tank, and all you got is lines going to the front. You know what I mean? Remember the Cadillac that we had in here, the Cadillac Escalade, that the black one, and she was having trouble with, and I mentioned this the other day, her traction control light was coming on, and it turned out that when she went to the Cadillac place, they said, well, your fuel pressure is really high, and we need to do that. And that'll probably fix your traction control. And I said, really? It sounds kind of crazy. But we got over here, checked it, and our fuel pressure was 160 pounds, which was about over 100 pounds too high. So we took the fuel, it's regulated in the tank. So we pulled the pump out, put another pump in there. They wanted $1,800 to put a fuel pump in at the Cadillac store. Can you blame her for not wanting that done at the Cadillac place? Anyway, we bought a fuel pump from over here and popped it in there and fixed that problem. And furthermore, doggone traction control light went away. You know what I mean? Yeah, don't you figure it, but anyway. Well, they detorques the engine. And like if you're going into it too much and you're spinning, one of the things that these newer ones do is they detorque the engine. They take some of your power away because you're saying you're really accelerating faster than you need to. This is ridiculous. We just need to rob some of your power. And that's what it does. And I've got a Lexus throttle body over there somewhere that's got a throttle plate that's above the throttle plate. And if you were spinning the wheels on that one, that throttle plate was above the throttle plate would close off some of your air. And it's basically set up that way. And Lincoln's did that for a while too. Okay, what happens when the fuel lines get too hot and only fuel vapors go to the fuel injectors? That's called vapor lock. And how can you fix that?
You can reroute the fuel lines if they're
Yes.
too close to something.
Unless the fuel pump itself is cavitating, shoving air in there, and it's not heat that's causing it, it's actually a bad fuel pump. Typically, unless the fuel lines have been rerouted by somebody, or if you've got a weak fuel pump, it will do that too. Like on some of the old ones, got the old diaphragm fuel pump, feeding the carburetor or whatever. You can have a fuel pump that's getting weak. Something else that'll happen with fuel, and Melissa, you listen to this because you may run into it. Like you got a late '80s Nissan Sentra that's got a carburetor on it, and I had one of those, and I've seen Escorts do it too. So you drive around, everything's fine. You park, and it's hot day, and you walk into the store. You come back out, you crank it up and you drive about 100 yards and then all engine dies. And you go, and then it eventually catches up and goes again, and you drive on. And what you find out is that's a fuel pump. They got 2 little check valves in a fuel pump, and it's on the side of the block, and it's riding on the camshaft, and it's pumping that fuel up to the carburetor. When one of those check valves comes apart, what will happen is that fuel pump actually loses its prime so that it can't bring fuel, and you burn up what's in the carburetor reservoir because there's not any more coming up there yet. And you spin it and spin it and spin it and spin it and spin it, and eventually it picks up a prime and fills the carburetor up, then you can drive it on. I mean, and that's a fuel pump, just about every time. If you know, if it stops and you look and you open your choke and you hit that throttle and there's no gas squirting in there, and then you spin it, spin it, spin it, and you get gas that fires up, that's going to be a fuel pump. See what I mean? I mean, that's a little troubleshooting trick I'm giving you there, right there. Technician A says low power on acceleration is a symptom of a restricted fuel filter. That's what we were just talking about, and that's true. Technician B says loss of high-speed engine performance is a symptom of restricted fuel filter. That's true too. Both those guys are right. How much fuel should be supplied to the engine every 30 seconds?
2 pints.
It's going to be the A. It's going to be 2 pints. And on a General Motors vehicle, how long will the fuel pump run if the ignition is turned on but the engine is not started?
Between 10 and 20 minutes.
See, this person that wrote this test is all about GM. And there are some people out there that all they want to talk about is GM. They don't want to talk about Dodge. They don't want to talk about Toyota. They don't want to talk about nobody else. They just want to talk about GM because they know GM inside out.
Oh, no, it's too
With all due respect to the person that wrote the test, when you're going, General Motors, General Motors, General Motors, General Motors, you can read that into these questions that they're General Motors nut. The fuel pump's turned on and off by what?
Wait, that was C, right?
2 seconds. That's right. 2 seconds is correct. That's the way it is on a lot of them, though. Except on one vehicle, that when you turn on the key, runs the fuel pump for 20 seconds when you run it. You know which one that is? That's the one Quincy drives. That's 6-liter Power Stroke. When you turn on the key, the fuel pump runs for 20 seconds before it shuts down. And if I remember right, they stuffed the fuel pump relay up in there in the dash close to the radio. I don't know why in the Sam they done that. Okay. The fuel pump is turned on and off by what?
C.
It's not a rocker switch? Okay. The fuel pump relay. Well, what operates the fuel pump relay? Huh? Pardon me? Okay, some vehicles have got a backup system. No, the ignition switch don't operate the fuel pump relay. The engine controller does. You turn on the engine controller, it wakes up, it runs the fuel. How can the ignition switch run it for 2 seconds and automatically shut off? Who's thinking clearly in here, okay? You know the engine controller controls that. Now the relay that fires up when you turn on the key, which would be your EEC power relay, or there's relays on the GM, there's the ASD relay on the Chrysler. If they come on whenever you turn on the key, they're actually going to power up the coil on the fuel pump relay, but the fuel pump relay coil is energized by the engine controller for the 2 seconds. And if it sees engine spinning, it energizes it again, it holds it in if the engine's running. You know the strange thing about a relay, most of the time, 99% of the time, now you almost very seldom see this, once a relay latches and it's doing things, it will usually keep the current flowing. Usually when a relay fails, it'll fail when it's being energized, not while it's running. Well, occasionally you'll see an exception to that. Wendy Johnson was pulling into the parking lot on her Expedition one time. She had a 98 Expedition or something, and she's turned into a parking place and the engine died. And I went up there. I mean, she hadn't done anything except start to turn in. So I went up there and Moody may have been with me. One of them guys was. And I went up there and I found out that there was no fuel pressure to begin with, and the fuel pump relay was not delivering fuel to the fuel pump. I mean, not delivering power to the fuel pump, and it just died en route. And so I sent whoever was with me, I used them for a gopher, and they went and got me another relay, and I popped it in there, and boom, she fired up and went on. But I mean, that's one of the very few times in my career I've ever seen a relay fail. Now there's another one. Remember when I told you about the motorhome? This guy come over and he goes, my motorhome is, I parked it 3 weeks ago and it was running just fine. And it was in the springtime, stuff growing, it's early summer. And he said, I parked it, it sat there 3 weeks, and now it won't start. And I said, well, let's go ahead and see what we got going on in this thing. So I walk out there and I get up in this thing and I go, turn it on. Or I had a shop foreman was with me, I had to turn it on, I listened to the gas tank, there was no fuel pump operation. And so I pull the relay out and I could bypass the fuel pump relay and the pump would run, the engine would start. So I took the relay apart, I popped the little cover off of it and opened it up, and one ant had managed to crawl up in that relay and get between those points, and when they went, and he had enough mass in his body to keep those contacts from coming together. So this teeny little tiny ant stopped that 10,000 pound motorhome. And one of the reasons I looked at that was I noticed that he had parked it here, and these little tendrils of some kind of wisteria vine or something had been growing over and were touching the van. And so the ants will walk over here, they'll walk on the van, they'll go in here, and for some reason they're drawn to this electrical stuff. I don't know why. I've actually seen ants pile up on top of a doggone car battery so deep, like a quarter of an inch deep from post to post, and kill the car battery. Because of ants. The current going through the body of those ants has created surface drain on that battery. And occasionally you'll open it up and you'll see ants all over the top of the battery, huh?
It's like
And they don't die from it?
Yes.
something similar to.
Yeah, there was an ant graveyard up there, man.
Like, you know how you make electricity out of potato?
Yeah, yeah.
And roaches and ants and all, they love potatoes. That's their favorite food to go hide in.
Yeah.
I figure they think, oh, electricity.
Yeah, maybe you got a good point there.
That means
Yeah.
potatoes.
Well, also the points on your regulator on your pump. If you live out in the country and you got a pump and a well, you know how ants like to get in there in them points and screw them all up. Well, my daddy went out there one day because he didn't have no water pressure, and he looked, pulled the cover off his regulator, and the ants all in it and everything. And he just gonna get the ants out of there, so he got some bleach. He's splashing bleach all over that, and that bleach caught fire and burned his regulator up. He goes, I didn't know bleach would burn. That was plumb funny. But he had to go get another regulator and put on there. Anyway, let's see, when the vacuum lines are removed from the fuel pressure regulator with the engine running, what will the effect be on the fuel pressure? Come on, guys. Don't play dumb with me.
I'm
What?
reading the question. Nothing.
It's going to increase 10 pounds. 20 inches of vacuum is equal to 10 pounds of pressure, right? So basically, what they had the notion of was they had the idea that as the vacuum changes, the fuel pressure needs to change in response to that vacuum, because as pressure drops, as the pressure drops, the vacuum increases, the pressure drops, we need to decrease the fuel pressure, because we don't want the differential in fuel pressure to alter the injector flow. You got me? Now that turned out not to be that big of a deal on that thing right there. But here's something else. Listen to this. Melissa, pay attention. You're going to be a troubleshooter. Trying to help you with troubleshooting. What we're going to do, let's say that you suspect a weak fuel pump. Okay? We're going to put our fuel pressure gauge on there. We're going to fire it up. We're going to see fuel pressure that's according to specs, right? All right. Well, that's what we're going to do now. Listen up. Important, y'all. You're going to pull a fuel pressure regulator vacuum line if it's got one on it. You know, if it don't got one on it, you just do this test without pulling the vacuum line. Pull it up, and you're going to watch that fuel pressure, and you're going to take your throttle, or if it's got electronic throttle body, you're going to get some yo-yo to sit in the seat and do it for you. And you're going to boom, real quick. Now I want to blow the engine up, but you're going to snap the throttle of the floor just real briefly. If that fuel pressure drops in response to you snapping that throttle, then you got a weak fuel pump. I used to have motorhomes that come in there. Oh, this was wonderful. In the summer, and the fuel pump's died on the darn thing, or it's trying to die, and they're losing power. Well, they're thinking maybe the gauge ain't right and I'm low on gas. So they stop somewhere, and they get their credit card out, and they go ding, 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 and they put 80 gallons of fuel in that darn thing. And they come into the dealership with an 80-gallon fuel tank slammed full of fuel and a bad fuel pump. I pull the engine cover off, put the gauge on it right quick, boom, in 5 minutes I've made my diagnosis, I know what's wrong with it. And it pays like 6 hours to change that fuel pump. Well, where in the Sam Hill are you going to put 80 gallons of gas? Think about that. How much 80 gallons of gas weighs? How much a gallon of gas weighs? About 6 pounds? Okay, so how much is that? That's 500 pounds of gasoline, man. What are you going to do with that? You going to get up under that tank, hold it or something? I don't think so. But they had these straps under the tank, but they also had some ears on the end of the tank that were bolted to the frame. And so I would take these long pieces of threaded rod, and I had some long, deep sockets I made for it, and I would take a long piece of threaded rod and I'd put it in there like, here's my, the tank is like this, and on both ends of the tank, you got an ear and you got the frame, and I would take the bolts out that were in here, there's a hole in there, and I would put a piece of threaded rod on there, like that right there, and it'd be a long piece of threaded rod, and I put a nut right there. All right, so I take both the straps off, but I've got my long piece of threaded rod there, and I had a special socket that I had made for this purpose, and I had 2 air ratchets, and I reach out both ends of the thing, and I go, know where them ratchets and them, this all threaded rod was holding that tank and it just come right on down to the ground. And then when I got through changing the pump, which was easy to do then because it's still sitting level, you pull it out, the gas is in there, right? Put it back in there, tighten everything back up, hook your lines back up, run them things back up. It'd pick that old 500-pound gas tank right back up and go right where it's supposed to go. That was something I came up with because I had to deal with so much of that junk. You know, motorhomes are a pain anyway. But anyway, occasionally you'd see one that you could change the pump without pulling the tank because there was space between it, but it would be a sort of a frame tunnel there. Well, the word to the wise, if you're in a situation where there's going to be a lot of gas fumes, don't just lay on there and sniff that garbage because you'll wind up killing all kind of brain cells. So what I'd do is I would get me a fan blowing so it was blowing through there from behind me and let it blow that gas fumes the other way. Let it blow out the other side, and that way you ain't breathing it. So you're getting breathing fresh air behind you. Okay, just if I don't tell you this stuff, I'll forget it, and there's a reason why you need to know it, okay? So just bear with me on this. All right, Technician A says all the injectors in the sequential fuel injection system often use the same power wire. Technician B says each injector in a sequential fuel injection system should have a different ground wire. Both of those guys are right. Typically, you're going to have the same wire feeding it and all that. What happened there? Did you drop a relay or something? What is
Pat
that?
has one.
Oh, okay.
Pat's got a connector and.
Okay, yeah, I guess so. That makes sense. All right, he's got a relay in his hat. I don't even know what that's about.
Makes
Okay.
the equalizer go.
Oh, yeah, I
It's
see your
got a
equalizer.
microphone on it, too.
Yeah, okay. We wish to know where, therefore, what these things mean. Okay, Technician A says, he had to go find the relay that went in his hat. That was pretty interesting. Okay, let's see. Technician A says fuel pressure regulators are often located on the return side of the fuel rail. Technician B says the fuel pressure regulator is located at a fuel tank on vehicles using mechanical returnless systems, and that is, both those guys are right. What have we got here with a mechanical returnless system on it? One thing off the top of your head. Come on. Plymouth Neons. It's got one line going to the fuel rail. So you can tell. Got it? All right. The Technician A says vacuum operated fuel pressure regulators allow an equal fuel pressure drop across the fuel injectors all the time. That's what I was talking about, Willie. Remember that? Technician B says intake manifold pressure is high at idle. Which technician is correct? Yeah, because it's low at idle, isn't it? Whenever you get the throttle plate closed, the engine, is pulling on that throttle plate and it's going to make it low. Technician A says vehicles with electronic returnless fuel system use pulse width modulation to power the fuel pump and maintain fuel pressure. Technician B says electronic returnless fuel system use power transistor to control the fuel pump. He's right about that. That's both them guys. However, I'll tell you something. I had a little case study on a Mustang that had the fuel, there's a module in the trunk that the engine controller uses to control the current going to the fuel pump, and that's how it controls the pressure. It's got a pressure sensor on the fuel rail for feedback purposes, and then it's able to use this little powerful little module in the trunk, and it's going to drive that fuel pump. This Mustang was running high fuel pressure and black smoke. And what happened when they found out what was going on with that was there was the wire that was coming from that module was shorted to ground inside the tank. Rubbing on the bracket, it shorted to ground, and it had the full power going to the pump all the time. See what I'm saying? So if you got fuel power going to the pump all the time, you got high pressure. You're going to have a rich running engine. Occasionally, this is another little thing that you won't find in any textbook I've ever seen. Fuel pressure regulators will leak on GM cars, and on Ford cars, what they'll do is sometimes you'll be driving along here and you'll all of a sudden you're running rich, and then you'll run normally, and you may run rich, you may run normally, black smoke. And there's other reasons could happen, like the oxygen sensor wire shorted to ground, and it thinks it can trust that signal. It'll increase the fuel pulse if the oxygen sensor wire shorts away or whatever. But if you can actually take this fuel pressure regulator and you put a fuel pressure gauge on it, put it on your dash where you can read it, or get one of these like we've got, the one that with electric wire going to it as a transducer. And if you see that fuel pressure jumped up to 100 pounds, the fuel pressure regulator is probably bad. I've actually had one of them fuel pressure regulators, that little round thing with the vacuum line goes through. If you tap that fuel pressure regulator, sometimes that pressure will jump way up, and then you know you got to put a regulator on it. Fairly easy to do. So just remember that. This is troubleshooting tricks. Ain't that right, Moody? Mm-hmm. You need that, don't you? I mean, this right here is kind of dull and boring when you're sitting in a classroom, but when you're out there trying to fix a car and you're trying to survive in the real world, it's good to remember this stuff. You know what I mean? Are you good at remembering, or are you good at figuring it out the first time?
Little both.
Is that right? That's good, is if you can do that. I've had one guy that could remember really good, but he couldn't figure nothing out. He had to draw on past experience, fixed every car, And if you're running, he hadn't run across it before, he couldn't figure out what was wrong. So you gotta have a good library of skills. Of course, you won't need that if you're gonna work at the dollar store, you know what I'm saying? Okay. You don't even really need to know anything if you're gonna work at the dollar store except how to stock shelves or be nice to customers and all that kind of thing. And then that job really pays well too, you know. Okay, so forever. It's a good retirement job. All right, now then, we got right here, all of these are returnless fuel systems except A, demand delivery, B, electronic returnless, C, mechanical returnless, or D, all of these are types of returnless systems. That's D. Which term describes a PCM shutting off fuel injection when the accelerator is pressed all the way down?
Closed loop.
Clear flood mode, and it's not present on every single car from what I understand. I haven't seen a car without it, but when you put it in clear flood mode, to keep it from starting up, be aware of the fact that if there's gasoline puddled in the manifold and it can pick some of that stuff up, it may start up anyway. You cannot guarantee that it won't start with the gas all the way to the floor, even if it has clear flood mode. So be really careful about that. Had one of these knotheads out here blew an engine up for me one day on a trainer car like that. Which term describes the PCM using oxygen sensor feedback to control fuel delivery? Which one is it? What is it?
Is it closed?
Closed loop mode is when it's paying attention to the oxygen sensor. If you're looking for fuel trim information, you need to make darn sure you know if it's an open loop or closed loop. If it's an open loop mode, you can't trust your fuel trim information because it's ignoring the oxygen sensor anyway. The short fuel trim is an instant response to the oxygen sensor. Long fuel trim is going to be the course adjustment on that. And it updates a lot more slowly. Technician A says an idle air control valve controls the airflow past closed throttle plates. Technician B says the idle air control valve is usually controlled by a stepper motor.
Both.
Who's right about that? It's a stepper motor on Jeeps and the GM stuff and on some of the other ones, but it's done differently on your Asian cars and on Fords. On Fords, it controls current. It's not a stepper motor. It's actually just a current, variable force solenoid. Okay, let's see. Which of these fuel injection systems delivers fuel into the intake manifold?
Core ejection.
That's going to be the throttle body injection. Huh? This is dumb. Why they put that there? Look at that. They're actually wanting that for an answer, and I don't like that. Where do they deliver it? They deliver it above the throttle plates on throttle body injection. But D should say all of the above. Well, returnless injection, that sounds good. Speed density, yeah. Port injection, yeah. I mean, so why in the thunder?
That's why I was just looking confused. So I
That is a
couldn't
stupidly worded question. I'm going to talk to him about this.
figure it.
Okay, when the fuel pressure regulator on a gasoline direct injection system is activated, the fuel pressure, is deactivated, the fuel pressure defaults to what? Low pressure mode. Low pressure mode. What gasoline direct injection operating mode is used to burn sulfur from the NOx catalyst?
Stratified heating mode.
Stratified heating mode. Stratified heating mode. Some gasoline direct injection systems can fire the injector more than once per injector event. That is true.
Whoa.
Yeah, we don't have that.
You don't have that?
We have one sheet.
Well, we're going to go over it anyway. The gasoline direct injector is held open with 50 to 90 volts.
False.
That's false. And then a late injection event may be used to heat up the catalytic converter.
Say that again.
A late injection event may be used to heat up the catalytic converter.
True.
Okay, let's see. And it will probably be the end of that. Okay, let's cut it off right there. We're good. All right, did everybody learn something today?
That was easy.
Bringing it all home, isn't he?